Can you really buy real estate with $0? Should you ask for seller financing, and how? And is software better than a spreadsheet for bookkeeping? My community asked me the hard questions, and in today's episode, I'm answering them all. Let's get started. Welcome to the podcast, Real Estate Investing with Coach Carson. I'm your host, Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach Carson. And this is a show to help you get out of the financial grind so you can spend your time doing more of what matters. I'm going to go through these questions rapid fire style so I can get to as many as I can. And the first group of questions came from my rental property mastery community, also known as RPM. If you haven't heard of this, this is a private community where I teach and coach. We have an amazing group of small and mighty investors that's capped at 300 members. So you can check that out at the link in the podcast and YouTube description below. This first question came from Jonah Pascua, and Jonas was asking about how do you make your offer stand out, your best offer to buy a property? How do you do that? And we've been working a lot in the community lately on buying more properties. And how do you do that? By making more offers, by making better offers. So I have a couple thoughts on that, Jonah. The first one is to make your offer cleaner and stronger and faster. Three different things. And by cleaner, I mean having as few contingencies as possible. Now, it's okay to have a contingency, and a lot depends on what part of your career you're in. But I'll give you an example that's both clean and fast and strong. So it kind of meets all three criteria. Then I'll kind of explain how you might be able to adapt it. I bought a property one time where I met a seller on a Monday and I offered to close on their property that Friday, Monday to Friday. Now that's usually not possible for a number of reasons. And one of those is just your closing attorney or a title company might not be able to get it turned around that fast. So you have to know, we were doing a lot of closings and I had called my attorney and said, hey, can you get this closed? And they could. Well, I made a quick offer, so that was very timely. Sometimes people want to have their house closed really quickly or their property sold quickly. That's about as fast as you can get, 3 or 4 days. Some people want to wait longer, though. I bought another property where somebody wanted to wait 3 or 4 months. They wanted to know I was going to buy the property, and we actually bought it, and then they rented it back from us for 3 or 4 months so they could use the money to go buy the next house, and they were able to stay there through Christmas and do some things in the house until then. So timeliness was important. I did it quickly in that case. I also had a clean offer. So if you can have as few contingencies as possible, it's very typical to have an inspection contingency. It's where you have a certain amount of time to inspect the property to make sure there's no defects and negotiate based on that. It's also pretty typical to have a financing contingency. But just because it's typical doesn't mean that's a strong offer. So if you want to make your offer even stronger, either get rid of the contingencies altogether. That's what I did in my case. I inspected the property that day, got rid of it. I don't recommend doing that for most people, but if you can reduce the length of your contingency to maybe 7 days instead of a couple of weeks, if you can limit the number of contingencies, just have one contingency and you figure out everything in that time period, that would be cleaner. But you got to kind of match that to your own situation. And then the third one was stronger. So the financing is I mentioned that contingency. If you can have, the closer to cash you get, the better. Now, if you have to use financing to buy a property, that's pretty typical. That's okay. But if you really want to get a good deal, somebody who was very motivated, if you have your own cash, if you have money from a HELOC that you can basically like cash, if you have a private lender or hard money lender, they can give you a guarantee that, hey, the money's there to buy the property. Whereas if you go to apply for financing, FHA, VA, things like that, those are great loans, but they're a little bit less secure. There's an underwriting process they have to go through. They might inspect the property and not like this. They might turn you down for whatever reason. So the closer you can get to a stronger offer, a timely offer, and a clean offer, you'll increase the chances of buying a property. I'll add one more thing, is the more you can put yourself into the offer as a person. I find that helps in some cases. So if you can't meet the seller, can you send a note telling them about who you are, why you want to buy their property, make it a real person instead of just a number. If you can meet face-to-face with a seller, and if you're going off market, that helps a lot because you can put yourself into the situation and they know you and they get to know you. You can get to know them better. So your offer is more than just numbers. It's a transaction between two people and you can customize it that. So a lot more to say about that, but those are different ideas on how you can make your offer stand out and be a little bit stronger. Next question is another RPM member, Kyle Doherty, and he asked the question, did you expect at age 25 to 30, you'd be more or less accomplished than you are today? Interesting question. Never had that one before. I'm thinking back when I was 25 years old, and I think I was pretty clear at that point on what I wanted. I had this kind of emotional idea that I wanted freedom and flexibility. I had job offers out of college. I went to school at Clemson University. I played football at Clemson and thought I was going to the NFL. That didn't work out. And so I kind of decided I want to go into entrepreneurship before I went to medical school. I thought I was going to be a doctor, but I wanted a break. I wanted to take a break. So I got into real estate investing just out of curiosity. My father had rental properties and was into it. I thought it'd be like a 1 or 2 year thing. And then it stuck because I was just really interested in it. But my goals at the time, I wanted more flexibility and freedom. That's the reason I didn't go into medicine. That's the reason I didn't work for other people. I just jumped straight into entrepreneurship. So I wanted freedom. But the interesting thing was at 25, I didn't know how that would be, or the image I had then is not the same as it is today, 22 years later. And one of the things was I thought I was going to make a lot more cash flow. I thought I needed to make a lot more cash flow in order to be flexible and free like I am today, to be able to do what I want to do. I think I made a goal when I was 25 of making $1 million per year in cash flow. And so I just had this number. I read something like Think and Grow Rich, put that up on the wall and would look at it every day and visualize it. And then I would imagine, all right, what has to happen? You have to own a lot of properties. You have to flip a lot of properties. And so I just started sort of closing the gap on this big idea. And I don't know why $1 million a year. I say, that's enough. That'll do it, right? I'll get a lot of flexibility. And it took a lot of like iterations. I compared it to like a sailboat where, you start sailing towards the destination on a sailboat, but you never go in a straight line. You're always tacking back and forth. Like you have to go with where the wind is. And you're also trying to figure out how to navigate the weather and what's going on. We hit the Great Recession in 2007, 8. That taught me a lot. I also just clarified some of my goals. Like we got pretty big in 2007, buying and selling a lot of properties. And I started realizing like the cost of that and there's always a cost to every goal you have. And I wasn't willing to pay the cost of having a big business and a lot of overhead and, having to manage a lot of people. I realized there's other paths to have the same amount or more freedom, but with less hassle and risk. And there's some trade-offs to doing what I did, the small and mighty style. I'm kind of a bigger small and mighty investor, but the benefit has been I took a lot of mini retirements and breaks along the way. Whereas when you have a big, huge business, it's hard to slow that thing down. It's like it's got a momentum of its own. So I imagine at 25, I would have one of those big, go big kind of businesses. I thought that's what I wanted. I learned and pivoted from that. And where we've ended up today, a lot of it's been, there's a lot of wonderful surprises, things with my family, things with, just being able to, some experiences I've had traveling, living in Spain, living in South America, some of the volunteer things I'm doing in my community. I didn't know specifically I'd be that interested in that, but I knew there'd be this kind of lifestyle where you can choose and have optionality. That was the thing, like from the beginning, that's what I wanted, but the how has changed a little bit. So interesting question. I'm pinch myself. I'm super happy the way things have gone. But there's some things that worked out differently than I thought. The next question is another RPM member, Joel Sizemore, and it also had a thumbs up from Ali and Paul and Asim, other members of the group. And these questions are about how do you talk to sellers when you're buying properties? And the first one was, what's your pitch or introduction when you talk to the property owner when you're doing driving for dollars? So if you don't know what driving for dollars is you're out walking or driving in the community. You have a buy box, a location you're looking for properties. You find vacant properties, you find fixer-uppers, you find for sale by owners, for rent by owners. You add them to a list. You can just put it on like a manual list, like a piece of paper or a spreadsheet, or you could use a tool like I recommend, like Deal Machine, where you just add it to Deal Machine. And then you start trying to reach out to them, either calling, sending letters. And so that's driving for dollars. And then you try to talk to them about buying their house. And his question is, what do you even say? And my response is that it's really personal and very simple and straightforward. Typically it's through a letter or a text message in some cases. And I typically have done letters in the past. And if it's a really interesting property, I might just call directly, and Deal Machine gives me a phone number to be able to call people. It's something like this though. If I'm sending a letter, I took some notes of what I might say. I would say I typically try to like have a little, almost like a YouTube hook, that you want to get their attention or diffuse some of the awkwardness that you first have when you're calling somebody out of the blue or sending a letter. I might say something like acknowledging, hey, I know this is out of the blue. Just acknowledge this situation. There's a person sending you an unsolicited letter or an unsolicited call. And I might say, yeah, I'm writing or I'm calling or I'm texting. I'm writing you because I'd like to buy your property at such and such address if you're selling. So that's why I'm calling. Number one, it's out of the blue. This is why I'm calling. And then I might proceed to tell a little bit about myself, just a personal story. The reason I'm sending the letters, I also live in Clemson. I love the neighborhood where you have that property, and I like to buy another property that would help me with me and my family with our retirement. Something like that, like super simple, personal. And I don't try to like write a lot more than that. Maybe, in the past, I would try to build some credibility. I have bankability. I'm happy to buy your property as is, talk about the benefits. So I experiment with a lot of different letters and a lot of different phrases. And I'm talking to people. There's nothing magic about any of those. I think the directness, though, and the personal nature of my communication is kind of the main thing that I try to do. And then I have the other thing I'll say is that you have to follow up. If, somebody out of the blue, it might not be the right time, but you send another letter, or another phone call down the line, things change. And so that's the general idea of how I communicate with people. The other question that Joel had is, what about if you're talking to somebody who's in pre-foreclosure and you're trying to buy their property? It's a little different. I don't actually do a lot of pre-foreclosures anymore. I did a lot of trying to buy properties in pre-foreclosure early in my career. There's a lot of wonderful people who are in tough situations. And so just kind of emotionally taxing, very helpful when you help people buy their properties. But generally, I would send the same kind of message, but just be more urgent about it. Maybe send letters more often. That was the general idea. So I didn't change a lot about my specific postcard or letter that I sent. In some cases, I would call or even door knock if it's in my neighborhood. Is, hey, knock on the door. That's a little bit more. It's like a door-to-door salesman. It can make you uncomfortable a little bit. So I would still have a similar conversation, like, hey, I know this is out of the blue, or hey, I was doing some research at the courthouse. I noticed that the bank has started a foreclosure. I know this is out of the blue. The reason I'm here is I think I might be able to help if you needed. If you wanted to talk to someone, I buy properties just like this, or if you just want to brainstorm about solutions, I'd be happy to help. Something like that. Again, not for everybody. Not everybody's going to make that kind of call or make that kind of door knock and just show up at somebody's house. But there were many situations. I never had anybody slam the door in my face. Many times I bought a property, but many more times I just talked to them and figured out some things. And they said, oh, well, maybe they might not realize they could call the bank and get it out of foreclosure or work out a payment plan or something. So I would ask a question, hey, do you want to keep the house? Or what are you trying to do? And just give them some feedback or give them call this number or do this kind of thing. So that was my strategy, was if they needed to sell the house or they wanted to sell it, there I am on their doorstep. If not, then, hey, just help them out. And that's really the approach I took with every single seller I've ever talked to. Is that some people need me to buy their house. Some people don't. The people who don't, which is a majority, I'm just going to be a friendly, helpful person. And I'm just going to let the cards fall where they may. I'm not going to try to push it. I'm not going to try to be forceful with it. I'm just going to try to be helpful. And I'm willing to bet that a percentage of the people I try to be helpful with want to sell their house and they'll sell it to me. And I think that general approach worked really well. All right, now we're going to switch over to some questions from Instagram. So thank you all of you who submitted questions on Instagram. And if you're not following me on Instagram, check it out. I post a lot on there and have stories behind the scenes. This first response or question came from T Clanton91. And they posted the question in a couple different ways. The first way was, should you do the BRRRR strategy and then harvest your equity later on, meaning like buy and hold, pull your money out for now with a BRRRR strategy and then hold on to it? Or should you go ahead right now and just flip the property, sell it, make your cash right now, and then save that cash to buy all your rentals all cash? So I think they're at a fork in the road. They're trying to decide between which one. They asked it a different way. They said, why do you buy rentals with debt rather than just building capital through flipping to buy real estate with cash later on? All right, so I'm going to try to simplify these two paths. Neither one of them are wrong, by the way. I've done flips. I've done buy and hold. I would say the general thing that tilts me towards holding properties instead of flipping properties is the tax advantages. Every time you sell a property, you pay ordinary income tax, meaning whatever your tax bracket is, you pay taxes on that. And so if you're an entrepreneur, you have self-employment taxes as well. So it's basically in most cases, the highest taxes you're going to get are buying and flipping. On the other hand, if you buy and hold a property and you sell it a couple of years later, or 10 years from now, you typically get long-term capital gains tax, which at least when I'm recording this in 2025, long-term capital gains is capped out right above at 20%, but it depends on your tax bracket. It could be on the lowest tax brackets, it could be 0% up to 15% in some cases, 20. So those things change, but as they are right now and as they've been for a long time, long-term capital gains are much lower tax bracket than the highest ordinary income tax bracket. So that would be a reason to hold as much as possible. Now, so what my strategy was, I still had to flip to pay the bills when I was early in my career. So flip, make the money, put it in the bank, pay the bills, pay for marketing. So there's nothing wrong with doing that. But in terms of building wealth, I wanted to hold more so that I could then have that wealth grow. And there's a couple different ways it could grow. You could do like an intermediate hold where you hold it for 2 or 3 years and then sell the property then. I would prefer to do that instead of flipping the property if I can, because you're going to, and often what I would do is sell it to my tenant. So rent to someone who wants to buy the house, but they need a year or two to come up with their down payment, to work on their credit. So that is an excellent way to basically do a delayed flip. You're holding it. So it's a buy and hold. There's a risk that the person can't qualify and you got to rent to somebody else. But then you sell it to them without a real estate agent, without all the holding costs. You just rent it and then sell it to them at some point in the future. That was the way we transitioned from flipping to buy and hold, doing those intermediate length holds. And then other properties, we just decided to hold long run. If they're our best properties in the best locations, and if the financing made sense, then we would hold it long run and let it appreciate and grow over time. And those have been, I think you make the most money from that because there's no tax drag. You're not selling and buying and selling and buying. So I prefer to buy and hold. The reality is sometimes you need to sell short term for cash flow right today. And if you need even cash flow a year or two from now to keep growing, I'd prefer to delay that flip, try to sell it a couple of years from now to my tenant and make a little bit higher profit margin and then grow that way. That's the approach I've taken. There's lots of other ways to do it, but hopefully that's helpful. The next question came on Instagram from Anthony, and he said, I've heard this before from you, but I have no money. How do I start? So I'm going to be a little contrarian here, and I don't know your exact situation and what no money means, but if you literally are in a state where, hey, I'm having trouble paying the bills, or I'm just making it, and I have a little bit of money in the checking account or savings account where you're trying to do a deal with no money down, I would say don't do that. That's not a good place to start, but I think you can make progress. Let me give you what I would advise doing or what I've done myself as well. If you're already renting a property right now, then just keep renting. If you already own a home and you're living there, just keep owning the home unless it's a burden and maybe you might need to sell that property. But my first advice is just stay put where you are. If you're already working a regular job and have a good job, keep doing that. Try to get a raise, try to do more with what you can. If you have, the kind of debts to pay off, like personal credit card debt, kind of like the Dave Ramsey baby steps type stuff, pay off any high interest credit card debt, things like that. Maybe save any long-term debt, mortgages, things like that for later on, but pay off the high interest 10, 15, 20% debt for sure before you invest in real estate, because that's a much better return and it's going to kind of decrease the pressure that you need. If you have to get into real estate investing with too much pressure, you're not going to make great decisions. So stay put, get the kind of financial house in order first, which for me means paying off high interest debt, getting a little, at least a baby emergency fund, and then take a deep breath, and there you go. Now, at the same time, if you're doing that, if you're like, well, that takes, a couple of years to pay off the debt, do all that stuff, and you really are gung-ho about real estate, you can get a job or a side hustle in real estate. So maybe you could go get your real estate license and help people manage lease properties or help people sell properties. Or, you could find deals for other people, kind of be a bird dog for other investors using your real estate license. There's you basically want to get in the business of real estate, but not necessarily buying properties until you have enough cash saved up for your cash reserves and your personal reserves until that, the emergency is kind of paid off. That's step number one. However long that takes, whether it's 2 months or 2 years, that's just part of the process. And trying to do anything else, I think, will get you in more trouble. But the second step is once you've done that and kind of get a good financial base, then there are programs out there. One of my favorite ways to get started in real estate with little money or no money down, still not zero money down, is house hacking. So if you can turn your residence into a real estate investment, you're killing two birds with one stone. There's 3% and 5% down loan programs, like the FHA is 3.5%. A lot of conventional loans out there for owner occupied are 5% down, even for multifamily property, duplexes like that, things like that. You can also, if you're a veteran, you can get a 0% down loan, but there'll still be some closing cost. There's still going to be some reserves you need to set aside. So there's always some money. You need to have a little bit to kind of be a cushion. But that's the best way to get into a property with little or no money down is house hacking. And here's the other benefit though. There are other ways to buy money with properties with no money down, the BRRRR strategy, seller financing, creative financing, things like that, going with partners. But until you've done some deals on your own, or until you've worked in your side hustle and built up knowledge to do real estate, you don't have as much to offer to these people who have the money to put up for you, or you're going to have less credibility when you're buying properties. So you can buy properties with no money down, but you got to build up the muscles of real estate investing. And so you do that through either working at a side hustle or a job in real estate, or doing a house hack and kind of doing it on your own and learning on your own. Once you do that, you buy one or two deals like that, then you're off to the races. Then you have that experience and you can do more things and open up more doors to do even more deals. And you can keep growing with little money or no money. I did that. But I had to have a lot of knowledge that I just learned the hard way by getting in the game. So hope that helps. Hope that gives you a little bit of a navigation to get started. Let me know in the comments if you have any follow-up questions. The next question comes from Ronnie Heredia, and it is, how do you keep track of capital expenditure lifespans? This is also known as CapEx. These are those big expenses that come up from time to time, replacing the heating and air, replacing your driveway, replacing the roof, the big costly repairs. How do you do that so that you can plan for replacement? So this is a really good question. It's something I've been working on a lot lately, something I want to share more about on the YouTube channel as well. And I'm going to tell you that I've not always done it very well. And I'm going to give you like a good, better, best of my recommendations on how to deal with CapEx, and I actually have a freebie I just made because this is fresh in my mind. If you want to download a cheat sheet about my system for approaching capital expenses, I'll have a link in the podcast and the YouTube description below or above me here as well. You can download that for free. But let me give you an overview of the way I've done it in the past, Ronnie, how I'm working on it now, and what I'd like to do in the future. So in the past, what my strategy was, the good strategy, which is good enough, but not the best, is to just make sure you set aside at least enough cash in an emergency fund for your real estate business. For me, it was always like 2 or 3 months of your total operating expenses. So if you have $10,000 per month in principal interest, or not just operating expenses, your total outgo, your total expenses. So principal and interest on your mortgages, taxes, insurance, maintenance, whatever your expenses are that you have fixed, your costs you're always going to have every month, total those up, multiply it by times 2 or 3, and at least have that much in the bank at some point so you can have just an emergency fund. That's what we've done for years. In 2007 and 8, we had a big, 6-figure cash fund, and we needed it because we started, underestimating capital expenses. We weren't really looking at them. We were buying old properties. We'd fix them up thinking we fixed everything, but it was kind of cosmetic repairs. We didn't replace all the plumbing. We didn't replace all the driveway. We had trees that fell on the property or would fall down, and we had to cut those down. So there's a large number of deferred maintenance capital expense items we had to spend. And so we just would draw on our capital expense reserve fund and then fill it back up and then draw on it again. And that has worked pretty well, just for a super simple system. That's worked pretty well because we had just a big old pile of cash, and because we were making more and more cash flow over time. So we could both, live all out of the cash drawer, essentially. Like the rent we're making, we would always underwrite it. Whenever we evaluated a property, we'd say, we think we're going to have this much every single year in capital expenses. And we were generally pretty close on that. So we would spend money out of our operating expenses, rent that we collected. And then we'd also, if we got over that and we went over, we would draw into our reserves. So it worked okay. The problem with that is you're very reactive. You don't know when things are coming. So a better system, so that was good enough. A better system would be to make a list of all, for every property, of all the major systems. You could do it for every single system in the house, but all the major ones: roof, heating and air, plumbing system, electrical, and write, in a spreadsheet, essentially, here is the name of it. Here's the year it was installed, or what you guess it would be. So if it's a 1950s house and it looks like the original plumbing, you put 1950. And then this is where AI and some of these things come in. You can Google or AI ask the question, what's the lifespan of a copper plumbing system built in 1950 here in South Carolina? And it'll give you a general idea of the lifespan of that plumbing. And what you want to know in this kind of better system is, how much more life could I expect on this plumbing system or this heating and air system? If the heating and air system was installed 20 years ago, you're living on the last leg of that heating and air system, even if it's a good one, right? So you just need to know, any day now I could spend $7,000-8,000 replacing that system. And so what the second system does is you still set aside the big cash reserve, but then you do some forecasting every year. You look at it and say, all right, it's possible I could have 5 heating and air units to replace this year. Maybe I need to, not spend that money on a new down payment and set that money aside to make sure I have enough money to pay for those repairs. Or maybe I just go ahead and do those repairs now proactively and not wait for them. You can make that decision on your own. So that's the kind of forecasting is the better approach. So you have a big cash reserve plus forecasting. The best approach, and this is what a real estate investment trust or big, huge real estate companies would do, is they take that same spreadsheet, every single property, they put a number on it. They say, here's what we spent on it, or here's what the original cost was, 5 years ago when we installed the heating and air. And then they apply an inflation rate to that. You can do this with spreadsheets and say, when I expect to replace it 10 years from now, this will be the cost 10 years from now. And then you do what's called a sinking fund. You set aside money for every single item that you're going to have to replace in the future. It comes down to a monthly or an annual number. Here's how much money you should be setting aside every single year into this fund to be able to pay for all those repairs you have coming. Now, I will admit this is a pretty complicated equation. It's doable. You can do this. But if you take every single component for every single property, and we have a lot of properties now, this can be a pretty intimidating thing. So we are working into that. I'm getting to that point where I have that kind of system, property by property, but we are in the better system at the moment where we're not necessarily figuring out how much money we need to set aside. So if you have 2 or 3 properties, I would say, and you're good at spreadsheets, go ahead and jump to the advanced system. Go ahead and knock it out if you think you can handle that. But at a minimum, set aside some money so you can not be borrowing the money, not be surprised and have to go be in an emergency situation by not having the money. So that's how I'm thinking about it right now. This is evolving. If you want to download my kind of cheat sheet on how I'm thinking about CapEx, go ahead and check that out and give me some feedback. Let me know what you think and how you do your own CapEx planning. So Ronnie had another good question. It was, how do you handle tenant communications? So I have 2 different worlds I live in with my rental properties. We have one property that my wife and I self-manage, and then we have the rest of our properties that are third-party managed. So I'm going to give you 2 different answers. The property we self-manage is really just very simple. We use text message and email. I always want to do it in writing when possible, especially if we're following up on something important about a repair or maintenance. It's just easier for me to have a log in my email that I can go back and look up, and I'll just have a subject line that I can search for. So super simple for me. Email, text is more urgent, something urgent. I just have to get in touch. The way my property managers handle it is also always trying to get it in writing. Now there are cases when somebody needs to call, but the procedure that they tell me they use for a maintenance call is as soon as the person gets off the phone who handles the maintenance call, they then type it into a log and then have a record there of what their communication was. But you want some kind of written communication. This is super, super important. Whether you have just common kind of things or you have more involved problems where there's a conflict or some kind of argument about something, you just want to have everything in writing. It's just clear communications, easier. We can go back and read it. So that is how we handle it. There are many softwares these days which can help you do the written communication, but it often just comes down to kind of email and text. Text is less desirable because it's a little bit harder to search back through your text messages. So always push it to email. If you can proactively initiate a conversation, do it by email. Or maybe if you do have a phone conversation or a text, follow up with them by email saying, hey, we just had this phone call. This is what I understood that we talked about. Is this what you understood? Press send, do it right away. Saves you a lot of trouble down the line. So Ronnie had a third question. I included all 3 of his because they're all good ones. He said, what do you use for bookkeeping? And I think he means by that software. What software do you use? So I'm going to give you 2 different answers because I have 2 different setups. We have the one self-managed property that my wife and I manage that I talked about earlier. And for that one, we use spreadsheets. I use Google Sheets. And every year for many years now, I will just download all the transactions from the solo bank account that I have just for that rental property. I'll download those at the end of the year, and I'll just put them in a spreadsheet. I will add another column on the spreadsheet for the type of transaction. So whether that's repairs, taxes, insurance, utilities, if it's rent, whatever those income or expenses are, I label them. And then I have another tab with an income and expense report, basically just adding all that up. Rent minus all the expenses equals your net income, and then minus your mortgage payments. And I'll just have a little report there that I turn into my CPA. That takes me a couple hours. So not too big a deal with 1 or 2 properties. If you want to scale though, you should have a little bit better bookkeeping systems. So for my real estate business with many properties that my business partner and I have for 22 years, we've used QuickBooks, and QuickBooks is great. It works really well for real estate investing. We like it. Kind of a love-hate relationship. We feel like they've not been as innovative, or we've used a desktop QuickBooks for many years. We like using the desktop because we can have it for multiple companies and different businesses. They're kind of trying to push us towards the online type stuff for many years now. So don't love that. And I think there's going to be some disruption in that industry, or at least I hope there will be. So I'm open to moving around, but for now, QuickBooks is kind of what we're comfortable with and what we use and understand. So those are our two. I've had some students who had pretty good success with other ones. Stessa is one, Stessa, and Stessa is a they manage your rental properties. You can do leasing and things like that, as well as the bookkeeping side of things and managing expenses and reports. Heard pretty good things about them and had some people rave about them. There's others out there too, other software that is free or inexpensive, kind of customized for real estate. So I think there's a lot of good things coming on the market to check out. So speaking of Stessa, this next question from I live in OH, I guess that's Ohio, asks, is Stessa a good way to manage one property, or is there something a lot better? So this is a kind of ongoing answer I'll have to give you because it changes. There's a lot of software out there for managing properties, and Stessa is one that a good number of my students like and use for property management. And particularly if you already like it for kind of doing the management of some of the bookkeeping and reports, you can also use it for your property management. I think it's inexpensive or free. And so definitely a good choice from my experience talking to students. There's others out there. I'll tell you just my experience with software. Back in the day when I used to manage my own properties, we used something called Buildium. And Buildium is it's kind of like a high octane software. If you're trying to manage more properties, like you're getting up into 20, 30 properties, self-managing, or even managing for other people, Buildium's a great choice. I like them a lot and they have very good systems, but it's going to cost you more. So if you're only doing a couple of properties, I have used in the past Zillow to manage my properties. It does fine. It's kind of got the good base things you need to do, like taking applications, marketing the property, collecting rent, things like that. I've been impressed with a couple other ones on the scene. One in particular, Turbo Tenant, I've been really looking under the hood of them, and I might switch over my personal property to using Turbo Tenant. And we actually might even be talking to them about being a sponsor on the show down the line. So have liked what I've seen from Turbo Tenant, have a really rich feature set. And so check them out. I think they are very landlord friendly, kind of oriented around what we're looking for with software. But also, if you could look at just kind of compare notes, you always want to shop around on those. But it's a good time to be a landlord, just in general. Have the tech you can have to collect rent, communicate with your tenants, be customer service friendly with your tenants through a really inexpensive software. Like, it's never been better than right now. So take a look out there, but Stessa is a good choice. The next question comes from Chris Reese, and the question is, any tips for executing a seller finance deal? So short answer is I have done videos and podcasts on this for a very in-depth answer. I also had a whole chapter or talked a lot about it in the Small and Mighty Real Estate Investor book. So those are a couple of resources you can check out. Just look for owner financing or seller financing, Coach Carson on YouTube, and you'll find my old videos on that or the book. But just give you kind of a quick response to that. I've loved buying properties with seller financing. The benefit is you can cut out the banks. You can go directly to a seller and sometimes negotiate a win-win deal where you get an interest rate that's either at market or below market. You don't have to qualify at a bank. Many times you can get a lower down payment, and then the seller can be some benefits for them as well. Many times the sellers who have financed to me have been landlords who are just kind of tired of being a landlord, or they're getting up in age and they just want to sort of transition the way they work with real estate. So from them, instead of managing a property intensely anymore, now they can be the bank and they just get a payment from me every single month for a period of time. And so it just turns them from a little bit more active to a passive investor in a piece of property, but they still have the collateral, the security of that piece of real estate. If things go really badly, they understand real estate, they can take it back. That's the primary benefit. There's also another benefit to the seller. In some cases, if they've really owned a property a long time and it's gone way up in value, if they sell or finance it, they can defer some of the taxes. Instead of paying all the taxes in 1 year, you can do what's called an installment sale. And you still have to pay some of the taxes up front, like you have to recapture a lot of the depreciation, which is not as attractive. So they're going to have a big tax hit up front on that potentially. But if they made a big gain, let's say it grew by $1 million over the last 20, 30 years, then that capital gain could be spread out over time and they only pay tax as they receive the principal year by year. So that's something to talk to your CPA about or their CPA about. So the tips on executing the seller financing, there's a kind of soft skill tip and a more technical skill. My soft skill tip is when you're negotiating with sellers, don't come in and talk about the term seller financing or any of the variations of that contract for deed or any of those like technical terms. You might understand that and hope you do and you study it. But the seller, if somebody's confused or they don't understand something, their automatic answer is no. Like, I'm not going to do it. So what I try to do is in general, when I'm negotiating or buying a property directly with the seller, particularly because most of my seller financing deals have not been through real estate agents. I've bought a couple of listed properties, but most of the time it's been directly with the seller. Is I just try to listen and understand where they're coming from. And if they have owned the property for a long time, I start thinking in my head, okay, this could be a seller financing situation. If they have little or no debt on the property, that also leans more towards a seller financing situation because they need equity to be able to seller finance the property. And so if that's the case, then when I get through the looking at the property, talking to them, I consider every negotiation like a puzzle, like I'm solving a puzzle. So I'm listening, asking questions, turning over puzzle pieces. I'm not trying to like solve the problem yet. I'm trying to just turn puzzle pieces over. And so it's a listening exercise for a while. A real quick story. The very first seller financing property I bought was from Ed and Eileen. I wrote about them in the book as well. And I learned how to negotiate by just telling stories. Eileen was very sharp. She kind of educated me as a 23-year-old kid. She was like, hey, we're going to meet at the property. I want to get to know you better. You can get to know us. And we just told each other stories and learned a little bit. And so that taught me a lot because the transaction of the seller financing is important, but it's only important if it solves their life. It solves their life issues, their problems, their story. So you need to know the story. They're the hero of the story, the seller. How are you going to get them to where they're trying to go? And I literally ask those kind of questions. And in many cases, it doesn't make sense. Seller financing doesn't make sense if they're trying to buy another property and they need cash to buy the other property. So if you hear a story like this, like, hey, I'm just kind of tired of dealing with the property. I've owned it for a long time. I just don't want to deal with it. And if you ask a follow-up question, hey, well, why don't you just, did you like renting the property? Yeah, it was good, but I just don't want the maintenance and the headaches. It's just what I don't want to deal with. That's a story that might have a end of the story being seller financing. And so if I go through all that, I look at the property, I talk to them, then I'll present multiple offers. So I'll present an all cash offer, and then I'll present one or two seller financing offers, and just on a memorandum of offer. So it could be like a one pager. I used to do it on like a legal pad. Sometimes I just print it out on a one pager. Very, very simple, not like a contract, just a memorandum to have a discussion about it. So here's the price, here's the down payment, here's the monthly payment terms, here's offer number two, maybe a little bit lower price, a little bit bigger down payment, maybe a shorter term. Like the first offer might be the highest price, lowest down payment for 20 years or 30 years. And I know that's going to be an objection for many people. So the second offer might be lower price with a little bit bigger down payment and a shorter term, maybe it's 10 years instead of 20. And then the third offer might be all cash. So it's kind of an art and a science to doing that. But I found the multiple offers is an important part of the strategy because it just leads to a discussion. That doesn't mean they're going to say yes, but it leads to a discussion. And then once we talk about it in a kind of a story-driven way, then they might say, well, how's this going to work? All right, well, here's a contract. Here's how it would work. We'll sign a contract, purchase and sale agreement, and then the closing attorney, the title company, will prepare a closing just like we always do. And just like a bank would be secured, you'll have a mortgage against the property or a deed of trust in a deed of trust state. And you have to explain the technical side of things too. But it always starts with, how does this benefit you? And for me, it's, I could buy your property at this price. You'll get a monthly payment from me every single month. I'll handle all the maintenance. I'm going to be the owner of the property. You're just going to receive a check on the first of every month. Like that's the story that we have a discussion about. So that's in short how it works. If you have any follow-up questions, check out my video, check out some other details I've written about. It's a really good strategy, but you got to learn how to negotiate and how to use the technical side of things. This next question is from Brennan Waldron. And the question is, for someone in the early growth stage, they have 3 units already and they're working on their 4th unit, what would be the loan to value that you would advise? Loan to value, or also known as LTV. So thank you, Brennan, I know you've been listening to the show or reading my book. If you're talking about the growth stage, just to clarify what that means, I'd recommend everybody kind of put themselves in or decide which stage they're in as a rental investor, either the beginning stage, the starter phase, where you're just trying to find your first property or two, the growth phase, which is the longest phase, where you're trying to go from a small amount of wealth into a much larger amount of wealth. And you're focused on return on investment, leverage, grow. And then the third stage, which I talk a lot about lately, but I don't think a lot of other teachers talk about, is the harvester phase, where you kind of transition the game you're playing. Instead of growth, you're working on paying off debt, perhaps, but you're increasing your cash flow, you're reducing your risk, and you're trying to increase the amount of time you have. This is the reason you got into the business, right? You want to be a time billionaire, to have flexibility to do things like, for me, it was traveling with my family, living in Spain, living in Ecuador, having time to do hobbies or businesses that are just fun, whether they make a lot of money or not. So anyway, that's the idea of the 3 stages. He's in the growth phase, and he's saying, what loan to value should I be using? So what he means by that is what kind of down payment, what kind of equity position should he be in early in his career? The short answer to that is at this stage when you're growing, you want to be as leveraged as you can while still being safe. So what that means to me is like Warren Buffett always recommends having a margin of safety. You always want to have a margin of safety, and debt can be one of the riskiest things you do in real estate investing, but not all debt is created equally. So like if I were borrowing commercial debt, meaning this is usually debt that has adjustable rates after 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, has a balloon debt after 5, 7, or 10 years, that's much riskier debt. You want to be at a 60, 70, maybe at most 75% loan to value, meaning you probably have to put 25, 30, 40% down to feel safe on that kind of loan. But when you're doing like house hacking or FHA, when you're putting 3.5% down to get your first deal or two, you're getting a 30-year fixed mortgage. And if you have a margin of safety today, like the rent is covering all of your expenses and you have a little bit of a margin there, that could be a reasonable risk to take with your first 3 or 4 properties. So I would be okay having pretty high leverage. In fact, that's what I did. If you have really safe financing. So it depends on the financing. It also depends on how many cash reserves you have. You never want to get ahead of yourself by always reinvesting in the down payments if you don't have enough reserve. So for me, that's a baby reserve would be like $5,000 per property. So if you have 3 already, make sure you have $15,000 set aside. Eventually, as you grow, you might want to think about it a little bit differently as maybe 3 months of your expenses. So total up your maintenance, your taxes, your insurance, all your mortgage payment, and multiply that times 3 over all your properties. And just make sure you have enough cash set aside for that. So just basically an emergency fund. And if you do that, and then you're still reinvesting in high leverage properties, probably okay for your first 3 or 4. Every situation is a little bit different. I would be comfortable with that. Eventually, though, as you grow, you're going to get to a place where your rents grow, your properties grow, and you might want to start thinking about getting the lower loan to values at that point. So like I started off in my business with a few high leverage properties like that, but try to start buying properties below their full value, like 10, 20, maybe 30% below the full value, buying like BRRRR Strategy deals where you fix them up and add value to them. And then eventually you're going to pay your loans down, the property values will go up. So over time, if you're looking at your portfolio, that equity position should be more like, the loan to value should be more like 60%, 50%, 40%. And where I am in the harvester phase these days is more like 15%, 20% loan to value, because we paid some properties off. We have debt on some properties. Others have paid down a good bit. So that's ultimately where I personally try to get to, is either, if not all the way free and clear, a much safer position where you're not highly leveraged. And the people who are super highly leveraged, when things go down, you have a big turnaround, that's the riskier place to be. And you're always in a risky place when you first start. That's just the way it is. But if you're highly leveraged with those 95%, 90% loans, this is where the reserves come in. This is where you don't want to go too fast. If you hit a downturn like I did in 2007, you're going to have to lean on those reserves. You're going to have to be creative. You're going to have some negative cash flow for a little bit. But if you go slow and steady and don't get ahead of yourself, then those could be reasonable risks to take. Okay, those were some amazing questions. Thank each of you who sent those questions in. If you like this format, I would love to hear from you. This is the first time we've done it like this with a Q&A with multiple questions. So let me know in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening on Spotify that you like this format, if you have suggestions for future episodes. And if you want to go deeper on one of the most important topics we covered, planning for those big capital expenses in the future, don't forget to grab my free capital expense planning cheat sheet. I mentioned it earlier, and you can find a link to it in the podcast or the YouTube description below. And if you're serious about reaching financial freedom in 2025, the next video has my complete blueprint. This episode was a lot of random questions all over the place, which is great, but my next episode goes step by step with my recommendation on how you actually achieve financial freedom with real estate. So if you want that step-by-step guide, the next video is for you. You can click on it in the thumbnail above me here, or you can click on the link in the podcast or the YouTube description below. All right, thanks so much for watching or listening. I'll see you in the next episode.